The sun was still climbing over the wide plains when Clara May swung her saddle over the back of her chestnut mare. Dusty. The morning air was crisp and a thin mist rolled low over the fields, curling like smoke around the fence posts. Clara took a deep breath. The scent of fresh hay, horse sweat, and damp earth filled her lungs. This was her world. This was the Wild West she knew. People in the small town called her Ironback Clara, a name she had earned. From the time she was a young girl, she had learned to ride with the ranch hands, rope calves, break in wild horses, and work longer hours than most men. She had grown up without much softness around her. Her father had raised her on the ranch after her mother passed when Clara was just 5 years old. She had learned early that the world didn't slow down for anyone, and so she didn't slow down for it either. When she fell, she got up. When the saddle slipped, she fixed it. When a horse threw her off, she brushed the dirt from her jeans and climbed back on without blinking. Pain to her was something distant, a thing that belonged to other people. She told herself she didn't feel it, and soon enough she believed it. The townsfolk often watched her ride in amazement. There she would be, her hat tilted low, hair tied back in a loose braid, boots gripping the stirrups. She didn't smile often, but when she did, it was the kind of smile that made people pay attention. She was strong in a quiet way, not loud or showy. Some admired her. Some were a little afraid of her. But everyone knew Clara May never let anything shake her. That morning, as she guided Dusty down the path to the lower fields, the sky was painted with soft streaks of orange and gold. The wind was gentle and birds sang in the distance. It looked like the beginning of a good day. She had work to do, always did. Fences needed mending. New horses had come in last night, and the cattle were moving slow with the change in weather. She rode past the bunkhouse where the other ranch hands were still waking up. A few waved at her. She tipped her hat in return but didn't stop. Clara wasn't much for talking at sunrise. She liked the quiet. She liked being alone with the sound of her horse's steady hooves on the hard-packed earth. By mid-morning, she had already roped a stubborn young colt, calmed it down, and started working with it in the corral. She moved with easy confidence, her hands sure and steady. The colt kicked once, twice, but Clara didn't even flinch. She spoke softly to it, her voice low and steady until the animal began to trust her. That was her gift. Not magic, just patience and strength. That was when she noticed the stranger. A tall man on a dark bay horse was riding up the dusty road toward the ranch. His hat shaded his face and his long coat moved with the breeze. He rode like someone who'd spent his life in the saddle. Easy, balanced, quiet. Clara leaned against the fence and narrowed her eyes. She didn't know him. But the ranch often got new hands when the season changed, so strangers weren't unusual. The man dismounted near the barn. The other ranch hands were curious too, coming out to greet him. He introduced himself as Luke Weston. His voice was calm, deep, steady, like someone who didn't need to prove himself. He shook hands with the foreman and nodded politely to the crew. Clara kept watching from a distance. Luke was different from most cowboys who passed through. He didn't talk too much, didn't try to act tougher than he was. He had a way of standing, of looking around that said he had seen a lot but didn't need to speak of it. His hat sat low on his brow, but Clara caught a glimpse of his eyes, gray like storm clouds. She wasn't impressed easily. But something about him made her look a little longer than usual. She quickly turned back to the colt, not wanting anyone to notice. She had her work, and that was enough for her. By late afternoon, dark clouds were rolling in fast. The wind picked up, carrying the sharp scent of rain and the promise of thunder. Storms on the plains came quick and hard. The foreman shouted orders for the hands to round up the cattle and get them closer to shelter. Everyone hurried to their tasks. Clara swung into the saddle without hesitation, pushing Dusty into a gallop across the field. She didn't mind storms, they were just another thing to ride through. The sky turned a deep gray as the first drops fell. The rain hit the ground in thick, cold sheets. Lightning flashed somewhere far off. The crew worked fast, driving the cattle through the mud, their shouts nearly lost in the roar of the storm. Luke rode beside Clara at one point, their horses matching stride. He didn't say much, just gave her a quick nod. She nodded back. It wasn't a moment filled with words, but something about it felt solid, like two riders who understood each other without talking. By the time the last cattle were safe, the rain had turned into a downpour. The bunkhouse had taken on water through the roof, and the main ranch house was already full of people. The storm didn't look like it would pass quickly. The foreman sent Luke and Clara to check on the far edge of the property, an area with a small supply cabin used by hands when they were too far to make it back. The ride was rough. The wind whipped hard, pushing against them. Their coats were soaked through. Mud splashed their boots. Dusty snorted, uneasy with the thunder, but Clara stayed steady in the saddle. Luke followed close behind, his hat pulled low to keep the rain out of his eyes. When they finally reached the small wooden cabin, the sky was nearly black. The wind howled through the cracks in the walls. Clara pushed the door open and they stepped inside, dripping and cold. The cabin was simple, a wood stove in the corner, shelves with tools and blankets, and one old iron bed against the wall. It wasn't fancy, but it was dry, and that was enough. Luke closed the door behind them, shutting out most of the wind. Clara pulled off her soaked gloves and hung them near the stove. Luke did the same with his coat. The storm outside was fierce, rattling the roof and walls. It was clear they wouldn't be riding back anytime soon. "It's going to be a long night," Luke said finally, his voice low. Clara just nodded. She wasn't used to sharing space with anyone for this long, especially not a stranger. But the cabin was too small for distance. They worked in quiet. She started the fire in the stove and he checked the supplies. There were blankets, some jerky, and a small lantern. Enough to get through the night. The bed creaked as Clara sat on the edge to pull off her boots. She didn't plan on sleeping much. She was used to hard nights on the ranch. But when Luke mentioned the temperature dropping, she realized something. They might have to share the bed if they didn't want to freeze. There wasn't room on the floor that wouldn't get damp from the wind coming in under the door. She hesitated for a long moment. She wasn't the type to let her guard down easily. She'd built her life on being strong, independent, and untouchable. But the wind outside was sharp and the cabin wasn't made for two people to keep separate. Luke didn't push her. He just spread one blanket on the mattress and sat on the far side, giving her space. He was respectful, quiet, like he knew she wasn't someone to crowd. That was something Clara noticed, even if she didn't say so. The night stretched on, the storm showing no sign of stopping. Rain pounded the roof in steady, heavy beats. Clara lay on her side, facing the wall, listening to the wind. Luke's presence was quiet behind her, steady breathing, nothing more. She stared at the flickering light of the lantern on the wooden boards. It was strange to feel someone so close and not feel threatened or small. It was just different. For the first time in a long time, Clara wasn't out on her own. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She wasn't trying to be stronger than the world. She was just a cowgirl in a storm, sharing a cabin with a cowboy she didn't know yet, but somehow didn't mind being near. The rain kept falling, and the storm kept roaring. But inside that tiny cabin it was warm, and for reasons Clara couldn't explain, she didn't feel quite as hard as she always had. She didn't know it yet. But something inside her was starting to shift, not from pain, not from fear, but from the simple closeness of another soul beside hers on a stormy night in the wild, wild west. The storm outside grew louder as the night wore on. The wind howled through the trees and rain slammed against the old cabin like a steady drum. Inside, the lantern flickered softly, casting golden shadows that danced across the wooden walls. Clara lay on her side, her back to Luke, staring at the small cracks in the wall where faint streaks of moonlight peeked through. She could hear Luke breathing slowly behind her. His breaths were steady and warm. She had shared bunkhouses with other ranch hands before, but this felt different. The cabin was small, quiet except for the storm, and she could feel the space between them shrinking. Clara had spent most of her life keeping people at a distance. She wasn't cold. She just believed that letting people close made her weak. She had never wanted anyone to see what was underneath that tough, unshakable exterior. She had convinced herself she didn't feel pain, not in her body, not in her heart. But lying there in the stillness, wrapped in a single blanket with someone she barely knew, she felt something unfamiliar. It wasn't pain in the way she understood it. It was a soft, deep ache she couldn't name. Luke shifted slightly, careful not to disturb her. She could feel the warmth from his side of the bed. It wasn't too close, but it was enough for her to be aware of every breath he took. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The storm filled the silence. Finally, Luke's voice broke through, low and calm. "You don't talk much, do you?" Clara didn't turn around. "Not much to say," he chuckled softly. It wasn't the kind of laugh that made fun of her. It was warm, easy. "I can respect that." She could hear the smile in his voice. She didn't know why. But that simple, gentle sound made something inside her chest tighten. She told herself it was just the cold or the long day, but deep down she knew it was something else. Minutes turned into an hour. The storm didn't let up. The wind whistled through the cracks and the temperature in the room dropped. Clara pulled the blanket closer, but she could still feel the chill. Luke noticed. Without a word, he shifted closer, just enough so the warmth from his body reached her more fully. She froze at first. She wasn't used to this. She had spent years building a wall around herself. Letting someone close even in a simple, quiet way felt like a risk, but Luke didn't push. He didn't say anything clever or try to break the silence. He simply shared the warmth, respectful and steady. And somehow Clara didn't mind. The storm outside reminded her of the long nights she had spent alone in the barn as a girl, listening to thunder and pretending she wasn't afraid. Her father had always told her to be strong, to never show weakness, so she hadn't. Not once. But as she lay there listening to the storm, she realized she wasn't pretending tonight. She wasn't forcing herself to be strong. She was just there, breathing, existing. And it felt strangely good. Luke spoke again after a long while. "You've got that look about you," he said quietly, like someone who's been carrying a whole lot for a long time. She let out a small laugh, more out of surprise than amusement. "What makes you think that?" "You ride like someone who's got something to prove," he said. "And people like that don't do it for show. They do it so the world doesn't see what's underneath." His words landed softly like raindrops, but they carried weight. Clara wasn't used to people seeing through her. Most folks only saw the strong cowgirl who never flinched. But somehow, in a single night, this cowboy had caught a glimpse of something she had kept hidden for years. She didn't answer right away. Her throat felt tight, though she didn't know why. Finally, she whispered, "Maybe that's true, but it's not something I talk about." Luke's voice stayed gentle. "You don't have to. I'm just saying, it's all right not to carry everything alone." No one had ever said that to her before. The words hung in the air, soft but steady, like the warmth between them. She stared at the wooden wall, blinking slowly, letting them sink in. The rain softened after some time. The thunder rolled farther away and the storm turned into a quiet drizzle. The cabin felt warmer, safer. Luke's steady breathing behind her was no longer a distraction. It was a comfort. For the first time in a long time, Clara let herself relax. Not just her body, but her heart. She didn't even notice when her hand moved slightly, resting on the edge of the blanket between them. A second later, she felt his hand lightly brush against hers. Not grabbing, not taking, just there. And to her surprise, she didn't pull away. Her chest ached again, not from any wound or bruise, but from something far deeper. A feeling she had buried for years. She had always believed that feeling anything too deeply was dangerous. But lying there, with the sound of rain on the roof and the warmth of another soul nearby, that feeling didn't scare her. It made her feel alive. "Clara," Luke said softly, almost a whisper. "Yeah," she answered. "You're stronger than you think. But strength doesn't mean being alone all the time." She didn't reply, but something inside her shifted. It was like a door she had kept locked for so long had quietly opened a little. Morning came slowly. The storm had passed, leaving behind a soft mist that curled through the fields. Light crept through the small cracks in the cabin wall, painting pale stripes across the floor. The air smelled fresh, like wet earth and new beginnings. Clara blinked awake, still lying on her side. Luke was sitting up now, pulling on his boots. He gave her a small smile when she stirred. "Morning," he said. She pushed herself up, rubbing her eyes. "Morning." They sat there in silence for a moment, listening to the soft drip of water outside. Neither of them needed to say much. Something quiet but meaningful had happened during the night. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. Clara wasn't sure what to call the feeling she had. It wasn't something she'd ever felt before. She felt lighter somehow, not weak, but softer around the edges. They stepped outside together, the wet grass shining in the early light. The valley stretched out before them, golden and green. The storm had washed the world clean. The birds had returned, singing softly. Luke saddled his horse with practiced ease. Clara did the same. For a moment they stood side by side, looking at the rising sun over the hills. "You know," Luke said with a half-smile, "you're not quite as unshakable as everyone says." She shot him a look, not annoyed but amused. "Don't get used to it," He laughed quietly, adjusting his hat. Wouldn't dream of it. They rode back to the ranch together. The trail was muddy and the air was cool. Clara didn't say much, but Luke didn't seem to need her to. He rode beside her, steady and calm. She realized she liked that. She didn't need to be someone else around him. She didn't need to pretend she didn't feel anything. When they reached the ranch, the other hands were already up, fixing fences and tending to the herd. Everything looked ordinary again, but Clara knew something in her wasn't the same. She swung down from her horse, landing with a soft thud. Her boots sank slightly into the damp ground. Luke dismounted beside her. He gave her a small nod, the kind that didn't need words. She returned it with the smallest of smiles, something rare for her. The sun rose higher, lighting up the ranch. Dusty shook its mane. The horses whinnied softly. Clara glanced toward the horizon, her heart strangely steady. She had always thought strength meant never letting anyone close, never letting anyone see her heart. But last night had shown her something new. Strength could also mean letting someone stand beside you without fear. As the day stretched out before her, Clara walked toward the corral with a different kind of energy. She was still Ironback Clara. She would still ride hard, still keep her chin up, still be strong. But she also carried something quiet inside her now, something warm. Luke rode off to another part of the ranch to help with repairs. As he disappeared down the trail, Clara caught herself thinking of the night before. The rain, the soft lantern light, the way he had simply been there. No expectations, no pressure, just steady warmth. She let out a slow breath. For years she had believed she didn't feel pain, but what she had felt in that cabin wasn't pain. It was something real, something human. And for the first time she didn't want to hide from it. The wind brushed her face gently. The horses trotted near the fence. Somewhere in the distance, Luke's horse neighed. Clara tilted her hat forward, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. She was still strong, still wild, but now she wasn't afraid of feeling something deeper. The storm had come and gone, but the warmth it left behind would stay.